Johannes, thank you for joining our Tech Talk
Glad to
podcast.
be
I'm
here.
super excited because we always invite interesting people with a good perspective on the IT space and IT challenges. If you can just introduce yourself, tell me or our audience a little bit about your role, and
Sure.
let's start from this.
Yeah, sure. So glad to be here. I'm Johannes. I'm a director of engineering for Schibsted, which is a media company in Scandinavia. So we do news and marketplaces mostly. And that's my day job. And we have offices in Oslo and Stockholm and in Gdansk and in Krakow as well. On a personal level, I just got back from holiday, so I'm a bit hazy. Take some days to get back into stuff. Been renovating a house, which is really different from what I do every day. It's just so nice, to be able to paint and stuff and see like I did this. Like it looks nice, it looked bad, and I made it because we don't get to do that very often in our day jobs. I do stuff. I hope it works, but we'll see.
Exactly. We have this software engineering mindset, but at the end of the day, the engineering part is nice because you have to grab some tangible stuff, do something, and you see the results.
Almost like coding. Yeah.
And it's quite good to get rid of the keyboard from time to time, your Mac, and just do some manual stuff. I totally agree. How do you see the impact of COVID on the IT world? I guess there are many directions we can go, but your own personal experience, what surprised you most after, let's say, 1.5 years? And what was positive, what was negative, your point of view?
So it's I guess this is probably the same reflection that a lot of people have had, right? But I'm so glad to see is that it's really opened the eyes of people, and maybe more so companies, for remote work or working distributed, which I've been doing for a while and advocating for a while, and I really love it. I think it's great, and it solves a lot of the challenges we have in the IT space, like shortage of talent, for example. So why limit yourself to one city and one office when actually you don't really need to come to the office that often? So I think that's been really nice. And even though I've been sold on that idea for a while, I am still surprised at how well it worked and how quickly it started working. Our teams, we've never been better. And that's great. Kind of crazy because everything sort of changed from one week to the next, and it just worked.
Okay, so where does it come from? It does come from the thing that people had to work in remote type style before, or do you think that, I don't know, IT is just adaptable?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not really sure. I mean, so why it worked? I would say, at least I know that it worked for us because people really care about the job, and they know what they're building, and they have an opinion on the stuff that we're building. And since that we're fairly autonomous, then I think it works to not be together all the time. If you have a team that is maybe less autonomous, and let's say you need to do more micromanagement, for example, then I would be surprised if it worked as well, because then you just don't have the same possibilities of doing that and sort of huddling together and talking all the time, right? But if you have autonomy and people know basically what the end goal is and think for themselves a lot, then it just sort of works. And the funny thing is that I think the fear of management has always been that if people aren't at the office, then they will surely work less because there's so many distractions at home, right? But it turns out the opposite is true, right? So people actually work more and maybe even too much. So you have to actually be careful so people don't burn out, which is sort of ironic. And I don't know. It's been great to see that play out, and to have people now not even question that anymore, because everyone can see that it has been that way for the past, I don't know, has it been a year, 1.5 years now?
Since March, so it's more than a year right now.
Exactly.
But what was your biggest challenge as a manager? Because you have quite a lot of team under your command, and they supposed to come to the office, and now they are distributed. Of course, as you've mentioned, they're independent, but you still have some duties. So what is your biggest challenge in terms of managing those teams?
Well, I think it can be harder to pick up on signals, right? Like sometimes you go to the office and you just notice that someone is feeling a bit down because it's just the way they act, right? You might not pick up on that from Slack, from a text message. So I guess it's just, if I found that for us, it was really natural to just sort of call each other pretty often and just, Slack, hey, are you free? And then get on a call and just talk. and the barrier for doing that was super, super low. And since it was that from the beginning, you sort of still get these signals. I think I get like 90%, right, of you through this video call. I don't really need to be there physically. Sure. So if you sort of establish that as a normal, then I think it's actually fine. But if you don't do that, it can be, I imagine, quite hard to, like, after a couple of months, start calling someone every week and go like, hey, how are you really doing? You know? So I guess it's just about getting into new routines pretty quickly. And if you do that, honestly, I haven't really had any super big challenges with it. It's sort of just worked better than expected. Yeah.
Okay, it happens. So the good structure, good interaction makes the deal. So
yeah, and then of course also I think processes are important, right? So one thing that I think is really important for a distributed team is good working processes. So everything is clear to people and who does what and when is it done, and people feel accountable and all of that stuff. If you don't have that, then I think going from working in an office to working distributed is really, really hard. And I think even, some people even make the next step and do asynchronous work, so they don't even work in the same time zone. And then that just ups the game even more. It works, but you really need to be good at processes to make it work. So yeah, but I think the way that we work in mission teams mostly, and we sort of focus on, okay, we're going to spend the next 3 weeks focusing on increasing this number to this, and then work really closely on that. So it's sort of like a very focused work, and the process really worked for us. So that's why I think it sort of just all came together and worked out.
Okay, so what makes the high-performing team, IT team, in your opinion? Like, if you give us a few clues from your experience.
Right. Well, yeah. So I would say it's pretty simple. I had this discussion with one of our engineers a while ago, and he was a super talented engineer. He technically brilliant, but he didn't really care about the product that we were building. And so we used to have these arguments. Does that matter? He would tell me it doesn't matter actually that I don't care about the product, because I am a good engineer and the code I write is good, and the app is great. And that was true. But I sort of held that actually it is really important to care about the product as an engineer too, because the job is not just to write the code, it's also to be a part of, what code we should write and what the product should be. Because oftentimes I find that engineers have very, very important ideas and see possibilities that no one else can see. So let's say if that's a new feature in, say, iOS or something, right? Like, that's hard for someone else to pick up on. But as an engineer following this pretty closely, you're going to know months before it actually is introduced, right? Because you follow it. So I think that's really important, is not just to be great at writing code, but also to just be really engaged and care about the product and be close to the business, to the users. Say sitting in on user interviews, I think is just a hallmark sort of thing for me. If I ever see that in a team, I know that's probably a high performing team. But if there's silos and UX works by themselves, and there's handovers, and then there's the engineering team that gets the spec, usually a hallmark of a team that could perform better. So I think just thinking about the big picture and all being passionate about what they're doing is the big one. And there's all kinds of small other things, but that's the big one.
Okay, so like the business goals versus the technical product goals, and something in between, like feedback loops, so people constantly get feedback, so they can prioritize stuff. They see what's important for users. They're looking for shortcuts. How can we get there the shortest way, just to make our clients or other stakeholders, sometimes investors, happy?
Or just the users. Like if you really care about the users and you have a business mindset for, like, okay, how do we build something that both pays our salaries and also makes users happy? That's pretty strong. If you have a whole team of people, 5-6 people who really think about this every day, they're likely to build something great. So all those things that you mentioned, I think are really important.
Okay, let's switch to our countries, Norway and Poland. Because you've been here for a while and you have the office in Gdańsk. What is your experience about Norway and Poland in terms of the IT cooperation? Do you think that's like a big market, or how open are Norwegian people to cooperate with Poles? How do you see that?
Yeah, so I mean, so we've had offices now in Krakow and Gdansk for I don't know, a number of years, more than I've worked here, 7 years maybe or something like that. And I think it's just sort of necessary to expand the talent pool that we have, because there's not just enough not enough good people in Oslo and Stockholm. We just need a wider talent pool, right? So we need more places. And in the future, I'm excited about what remote might do for this, right? So maybe you don't even have to limit yourself to 4 cities. Maybe you look everywhere, which would be just so radically many more people. But that was the big one. And that's worked really well. I think there's just so many talented engineers in Poland. And also the success criteria for us has been what I was saying earlier, that, you know, in our teams, it's not, we don't really look at it as like, okay, this is in Poland, this is in Norway. It's more like, well, you're a part of the team and we're building this product. And even if some of those products are actually in a different language, so for example, some of the newspapers will be in Norwegian, right? Still, I think the connection between the teams, be that in Oslo or in Gdansk, are still very, very strong, and just the passion for the product is there. And that's really important, I think. So yeah, that's been pretty great. Sometimes there's like cultural differences that are funny.
Okay, give me something.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, so I can tell you from my perspective, at least, one thing that I really, really appreciate, at least in most of my Polish colleagues, I don't know if that's a Polish thing or just them, but they're quite direct. And basically, if something is not good, they will tell me about it. Although they didn't tell me for the first 3 months or so, maybe they needed to make sure that I could take it or something. But then after a while, I was like, well, here's all the stuff that sucks. And I love that, you know, because that's just so, I mean, I want to know about the stuff that sucks so we can fix it, right? Exactly. So I think those conversations are just my favorites. And in Norway, I think, and also maybe in Sweden, maybe it's a Scandinavian thing. I would say we're more careful about that, maybe. So sometimes we joke that the scale of how good something is goes from like terrible and crap to okay for our teams in Poland, right? But in Norway, it's like from nice to awesome. So that sometimes it's the same scale and it means the same things, but they're different words. So yeah, no, I just really appreciate the directness. Yeah, I think that's really,
I think it's an interesting movement I've noticed even in the IT called radical honesty. So I mean, you have to be a little bit brutal. Of course, it's a matter of language, how you say about bad things. It shouldn't be aggressive, it shouldn't be
but it's just honest,
wrong, but it should be very honest, because people who put things under the carpet or try to cover something doesn't get fixed. It doesn't work. At some of the day it will explode. It's gonna be tech debts or some legacy.
Yeah, it get worse.
It will only get worse. Sometimes it's better to say stop. Let's just use the sprint for fixing this stuff because it's important, or the consequences of not fixing it will be very, very hard. So it has to be reasonable, and not everyone. I mean, that's my experience. Not all clients like to hear the truth, especially when, for example, we have such a service called rescue mission, and rescue mission is that someone needs to be rescued for the client, and I don't know, it doesn't work. It works very slowly, and they ask us, "Could you guys fix that?" And we do the audit, and after the audit, we make a list of our conclusions, mainly that the code is low quality, or I mean, there might be bad consequences if we still continue working this way, and we recommend to refactor the app or write it from scratch. And they could. Today's surprise is always like, but I've already paid for the app. Like, I'm not gonna pay second time. Why are you telling me that I should pay second time for them? I'm like, I'm not paying you to. I mean, I'm not saying
this is what it is. You can decide what to do with it, but this is the
exactly.
It is what it is. Yeah,
it is what it is. IT outsourcing. Do you have some further experience, or?
For what? For
IT outsourcing.
Oh,
so working with, like, if you can give me, like, I don't know, one good story, one bad story, so we can somehow.
Yeah. Sure. Let's see. A bad story. That's hard to come by. Well, good story and bad story about IT outsourcing. Not really sure I have a good answer to that, to be honest. Okay. I have to dig deep to figure out if I have any bad stories, you know. I mean, so the same thing applies to any team, right? Like sometimes, so I don't have experience with this directly, but I know of companies that have outsourced for a long time, and it's very hard to change it. And maybe at some point they want to bring part of the team closer to where they do business and do both, right? But it's been very tough, and the reason it's been tough is because it's a very proprietary system and it's hard for anyone else to get into. But that's not necessarily an outsourcing specific challenge, right? It's more like in some teams that happens. And I would guess that maybe part of why it happens could be job security related. So like, if you're worried about your job, you might actually not try to make yourself unnecessary. You might actually try to make yourself necessary. And that leads to something that is very hard for anyone else to work with. But that that happens in offshoring and not in outsourcing. So it sort of happens in any case, I think. So I mostly just had good experience with it, but maybe it all boils down to just not treating it any differently from not outsourcing. It's sort of like, well, if you're gonna work with us, you're gonna be a part of the team. You'll be equal, and your ideas will be just as important as anyone else's. And we expect you to obviously write great code and maintainable code, but also to care about the product and contribute with ideas. And maybe that's, I don't know, maybe I've just been lucky, or maybe that's been, part of the reason why I haven't really had any bad experience with it,
Okay. I run a set of interviews in Denmark recently. It was like for the last 2 weeks, and I had a chat with different CTOs and director of engineering. And they told me some negative stuff about the level of English or a lack of, again, honesty, transparency, because as you mentioned, people were afraid at the beginning. If you don't fully understand the culture, you're a bit skeptic. You just want to have soft landing and then see how far you can go, how transparent. So again, it's a matter of understanding the cultural differences and how we communicate, just to be fair and so on. But what they also said was that there are so many companies trying to catch them. Like, for example, some guys are bombarded on LinkedIn with hundreds of messages. Hey, we are a super IT company from Vietnam, from Poland, Bulgaria. How to avoid that? Because my idea is that there is still plenty of work to do between some Polish IT companies and Norwegian companies. So how would you recommend some Polish IT companies, I don't know, be more visible in Norwegian markets? Connections, because in my opinion, it's always B2B. It's human, so it's a trust. But somehow we need to make the trust. Like, for example, I fly to Copenhagen and meet right now 12 people next week, and it's like a snowball effect. We meet, we chat. There's no sales attached.
And people hear good things. And
like, exactly, about asking questions about challenges and so on. And at some point, we will meet, or someone will introduce someone. What would you recommend Polish IT companies while entering the Norwegian market?
That's a good question. I think just wanting to help is a big thing. So obviously the cold calling is hard no matter what, right? So I think your strategy of, you meet people and then and then you sort of get word of mouth going is very powerful. I think that's definitely the way to go, because you could be as good as you want. It doesn't matter actually, because all the websites look very professional and the same message is sent by everyone. And it's hard. So I would say, at least from my perspective, is focusing on cost is not really that important, because whatever it is, if it's hourly price or whatever, it doesn't really matter, because if you work in the wrong way, you spend more hours, so it's more expensive, right? So you want to have a team that just cares about building something great with you. And so I used to work in consultancy agency, and we had salespeople that would find work for us, right? And we call them advisors. But advisors, salespeople in the consultancy business is basically the same thing. But what really worked, I think, is for the salespeople that weren't really so interested in selling stuff, but just more interested in building great things and getting something done. They ended up selling much more. Because that really resonated with people that needed help. Is they want someone who cares about their problem, right? They don't just want someone who will talk about like, hey, well, here's what we can provide in terms of like our hourly price and team is this big and whatever. It's more like, well, let's talk about your problem and figure out how we can solve it. That's really powerful. So I would say that is at least for me, just garners a lot of trust immediately, because that's what I'm ultimately looking to do, right? I want to accomplish something. So talking to someone who is also passionate about that is,
and it combines very well with product discovery. So basically, you have to spot the challenge. Then, if you somehow create the solution, it means that you are competent, or you have like wide perspective or brain full of ideas. And then you can convince someone that this is the idea. For example, we do make workshops for clients for 1-2 days. And we sometimes give 2-3 solutions for one problem, and sometimes totally different from what client came to us. And they're like surprised, like, whoa, there is another way of solving the problem. And different technologies, different approach, sometimes no code solutions or low code. And they're like, whoa, different angle. And that's fascinating, because then people feel that you care about them and the solution, not only about like, we give away
like
this.
Here's
like,
exactly. I agree. Because ultimately, you know, my if I'm looking for help, that's what I'm looking for help with, right? So that I'll really appreciate that. But just hearing about hourly rates and certifications and stuff, that doesn't really solve my problem. So it doesn't resonate as well. So I think your approach of doing workshops is great. That would really work, I think.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the interview. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. And I hope we're going to meet somewhere in Oslo or in Gdańsk whenever you come here.
Thanks for having me on.
And I really enjoyed the conversation, and see you soon.
Yeah, likewise. See ya.